Hey, welcome to another episode of Coffee and HEMA with me, Jamie McKeever. Today, I want to talk about still tournament rules design. I'm going to talk about weighted scoring, and I'm going to use that topic to actually make a more wider point, a more general point on kind of motivation behind selecting certain rules that I think some people kind of get wrong. Weighted scoring, right? Pretty simply, giving different points depending on where is struck and sometimes how that strike happens, right? Standard for Wessex is you get 3 points for a hit to the head, 3 points for a thrust to the torso, and 2 points for a cut anywhere else or a thrust to the limbs. And other things can affect it as well, right? It doesn't really matter too much. There's lots of different ways of cutting it up. The oldest rule set we've ever seen, one of the Bolognese sources talks about where they give scoring to, and it has weighted scoring. It actually scores higher points for strikes to the leg, which I'll come back to. But fundamentally, it's about rewarding certain hits more for various reasons. Okay, and there are good reasons for doing that, and there are less good reasons for doing that. But before I get into some of the consequences of it, I want to talk about the motivations. In modern talk, when you talk to people about why they put weighted scoring in, almost always people say, "Oh, it's because these strikes are more lethal. The ones I'm valuing highly are more lethal." Maybe, probably they are, right? Most of us don't really know, right? We've all kind of got this conception of what a real sword fight looks like, TM, and in a lot of cases, we're not really sure. But yeah, probably getting hit in the head or getting thrust in the torso is going to kill you. I think we can say that with some confidence. But I think this idea that it's about the lethality of the hit is a wrong way of thinking about it. And if I go back to this, the Bolognese version of this that we see, why they strike to the leg and judge that to be higher scoring, it's not because they think that strikes to the leg are lethal. He explicitly doesn't say that. He thinks it's because they are harder, so he wants to see them happen, right? He wants to see it occur. And this is a much better way, whether you agree about the leg strikes or not, this is a much better way of thinking about how to weight the scoring, because actually it's not about which strike is more lethal, but about what behavior does valuing one target over another promote and reward, and that you want to see, and then weighting the scoring appropriately. You end up in a fairly similar position, I think, for not entirely coincidental reasons, but it's still a better way of thinking about it because of some of the effects that happen. Most tournaments have some degree of weighted scoring, right? And I've run both ones with Wessex League, and I've run one without, some Sword Shenanigans, and I've competed in both. And I can see reasons for wanting to do either. There are some challenges with weighted scoring, which I think is the first thing to address, particularly from a judging perspective. I'll talk at some point about sort of the common judging mistakes that I've seen time and time again. I've trained a lot of judges at this point, so I have some general ideas about this. But broadly speaking, one of the things that's challenging is that judges are not normally wrong that somebody was hit. Judges are normally wrong about, well, not normally wrong, but one of the biggest times that they are wrong is about where somebody was hit, right? And if this is scoring 3 points and this is scoring 2 points, right, that can be the difference between a win and a loss, right? And actually, at pace, sword comes down here and then ends there. Happens a lot. Judges are going to make mistakes, right, about things like that. The more subtle your differences between target locations are, the more likely they're going to make mistakes. So, for instance, if you weighted thrust 3 and cuts at 2, generally speaking, they're not likely to make that mistake in most cases. There are kind of starting like a cut and ending with a point thrusts that maybe they will, but for the most part, right, they're going to be able to tell the difference between a thrust and a cut. But starting to find distinctions between, if you said, oh, right over the heart is 7 points, right, but everywhere else on the torso is 2, no judge in the world is going to be able to make that distinction. I've never seen that rule set, just to be clear, but I'm just trying to make a point here. So you've got to bear in mind that if you put in weighted scoring, and the more subtle differences you have in that weighting, you are going to cause judging errors by it, and you can train that out, and you can You can, like, for instance, you could define the head as, anywhere between the shoulders, and how you define these target locations can affect that. But judging errors aside, you are encouraging people to prioritize certain locations, and I think there's another safety issue here we've got to worry about, because pretty much every system, tournament system we talk about, weights the head as one of the highest targets. So we're encouraging people to strike to the head, and actually, that's probably the most dangerous location to be encouraging them to strike, because of course concussions, as I've said in previous videos, not in this latest bout, but a while back. Concussions are one of the few injuries that can occur kind of through perfectly working protective kit with no failure, pretty easly, right? So this kind of encouragement to strike to the head in particular can be of concern. But if you don't have weighted scoring, what tends to happen then is people, if I get as many points for a shallow strike to the hands that I can keep away safely versus a strike to the head, and so you don't have weighted scoring, kind of encouraging people to go to a more deep target, then what happens is people get very cagey with their fencing, especially if they're punished heavily for being hit, which they probably will be. They tend to try and engage at maximum distance. They tend to try and kind of keep to these kind of shallow targets and hands and kind of stay away. Which, there's nothing inherently wrong with attacking to the hands, I want to stress. Again, actually, I think it's Mancellino talks about this. He says, when I'm doing play fencing with blunt swords, I'll go for the head, and that looks flashier and it's cool. And if it's for real, I'm going to just cut their hands and run the fuck away. So there's nothing wrong, there's nothing bad about striking to the hands. But if that's the thing that's mostly encouraged, and this is my point that I wanted to come back to, then the main issue with that is that you're setting up a very limited part of what we see in the sources. Because many aspects of the sources do talk about cutting to the hands, and many aspects of them talk about going to deeper targets. And a lot of the more interesting fencing that we see in terms of things like setting up grapples, in terms of like complex kind of back and forth, are reliant on this kind of commitment to go for this, what I would consider to be a deeper target, whether that be torso or head, right, rather than kind of shallow strikes to the hand. So it's not so much that those are not martial or the bad fencing or anything like that. It's that having completely flat scoring makes those so much more of an attractive opportunity, and thus limits how much you're going to expect to see from people who are working from a historical text. That, to me, is the best reason for thinking about which scoring system to use, right? In general, right? It's what do I want to see? And if I'm choosing score, what do I want to see? I want to reward the things that I want to see so that they happen, right? And as a result, what we want to encourage is people to go to deep targets, which then becomes kind of head and torso, right? I've seen some systems that just distinguish between deep and shallow, right? Deep might be anything kind of, really kind of committed, kind of, it might even be knees up to elbows, right? And we're just talking about lower limbs for shallow targets. It might be torso and head. I've seen things that target kind of specific locations. I feel like having a deep and shallow split is kind of easier to manage. And, you can say edge cases favor the side of deep or something like that, because really, when we're having a split like that, what we're trying to encourage is this sort of commitment to a full attack, rather than just kind of cagey striking to shallow targets and running away. And the reason for that is that if you're striking to a shallow target, by definition, you're not engaging the opponent's blade, you're kind of avoiding it. So really the only way to keep yourself safe if you're striking to shallow targets is to keep your distance away. And again, that kind of doesn't lead to a lot of the fencing that we'd like to see. Having said that, I've run and competed in fencing tournaments that don't have deep and shallow targets, then just have a flat scoring of 1 point for wherever you get hit. They're fine, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's definitely fun to play about with it, and leads to a different system, kind of being effective. But especially if you want to encourage grappling actions and stuff like that, having some kind of weighted scoring system or some incentive for kind of committing to an engage rather than just kind of staying far away will lead to more things that we see in textbooks, kind of coming up in your tournament. Play about with both though; they're both fun, and I will certainly not avoid a tournament just because it doesn't have weighted scoring, or indeed because it does. So, thanks for watching. The last thing I'll say is if you do have weighted scoring, do think carefully about those distinctions about what you're weighting, right? The more obvious you can make the distinctions better. And I strongly think, particularly for head, these days, I'm in the vein that if you're going to say heads are weighted scoring, you should actually go anything kind of between the shoulders for that. It's very difficult to distinguish between a straight to the head that then comes down to the shoulder and a straight to the shoulder. And most sources that talk about descending cuts are not talking about cutting to the top of the head. They're talking about cutting to kind of neck area, which then becomes even more of a subtle distinction. So I think you get better results in terms of matching to the books from this, as well as better judging results. So that's one thing I would say. If you want to target the head, if you want to support the head being a high value target, make that shift as well. Thanks for watching.